Hi guys, this is Andy and Caine from Envision Fitness. This is episode 3 of Mindful Movement, and today we're going to delve into how to lose fat quick. So, once again, Caine, thank you for coming.
My pleasure, sir.
Honestly, mate, we're being consistent, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, what we've produced so far has been phenomenal. And now we have the opportunity to upload content as a means of assisting other individuals.
That's it. What I want to ask you today is how do you lose fat quick?
Well, first of all, we need to break down that question and, in particular, the word quick. What does quick mean? And as we
Exactly.
know, quick is subjective. And when it comes to stating you want to lose fat quick, what time frame do we have in mind? Is it 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? All of this is going to be dependent on the individual's availability schedule and other factors, obviously, such as their physical activity levels, their calorie consumption, their habits, their routine, amongst other factors. However, it ultimately should be, is it realistic and is it sustainable for that individual? And if it is, then you will lose fat, whether it's quick, it's yet to be seen. However, it can be done at a consistent rate. It's just going through the how and the why.
How would you?
Well, we need to break it down into a routine. And if we break down how to lose fat, we need to take into consideration of the individual's lifestyle. Bearing in mind, do they have children? Do they work? How many times do they go to the gym? How many meals do they consume? What's their calorie consumption? What's their macronutrients? Are they accountable? All of these factors is what's going to contribute towards their routine and their habits, which ultimately is going to determine as to whether that individual loses fat or not. And to construct a routine, obviously, you have to break down those factors to enable that process to occur. Otherwise, you're just going to encounter a number of obstacles and ultimately will fail at some point. It's just a matter of how and when. So, when it comes to losing fat, obviously, a lot of individuals would just say it's energy in versus energy out, or in other words, move more, eat less. Even though that is technically correct, in my humble opinion, it's the wrong way of saying it. Just because if I was to say to you, eat less and move more, what do you think it means to you in the sense of mentally? Like how does it make you feel?
Starved.
Exactly. Exactly. So we have to be mindful of how we come across as saying the process to lose fat. So, again, while it is true that you do have to move more and eat less or have energy in versus energy out to lose fat, it's not the correct mentality to possess because, as you've just said there, it perceives a negative image of it, whether it's starvation, eating disorders, it hinders the relationship with nutrition. And ultimately, not only do we want individuals to lose fat, however, we also want to enhance their perception of nutrition, knowing, that they have a positive and a balanced relationship and perception when it comes to nutrition. So, when it comes to eating less and moving more, I'm going to break down the actual process itself. So, what we need to take into consideration is something called BMR or basal metabolic rate. And that is the technical term for an individual's maintenance calories or the number of calories an individual burns at rest. So, currently, we are burning calories. Any form of movement or non-activity thermogenesis, you could be twiddling your fingers, could be flapping your arms, doing whatever. So any form of kinetic energy or movement will therefore result in you burning calories. And that is the first step is movement. So movement is what is going to ensure that your heart regulates at the certain beats per minute, which therefore relates to your metabolism. And the higher your metabolism is, the more calories that you will burn, not just during exercise, but any form of non exercise. And you might be thinking, how do I increase my metabolism? Obviously, there are going to be genetical factors that will come into play. So, individuals with different, obviously, metabolism or metabolic levels will vary with the calories that they burn at rest. However, you can enhance your metabolism through enhancing your cardiovascular system. So, any form of obviously cardio, building muscle as well, as you require, obviously, to maintain that muscle mass as well. And obviously, there's just a number of other factors to take into consideration too. So, what we need to do, we need to find out about how that individual wants to expend energy. There's no right or wrong. So people might be fond of walking, people might be fond of jogging, running, swimming, cycling, boxing, kickboxing, plyometrics, functional training, hit training, anything like that. As long as you are executing some form of movement, you will ultimately expend energy. It's just a matter of the what and the how. So, what form of cardiovascular are we doing, and how much are we doing? So, when it comes to cardiovascular, obviously, this is where it gets not only subjective but controversial. So, obviously, in my field over the years, a lot of people have hypothesized that executing cardiovascular is a contributor towards fat loss. So, what's your take on cardio when it comes to fat loss? Do you think what they say is true? Do you think it's not? What are your views?
So I think there's a difference between burning fat and losing fat.
Yeah.
You've got burning fat, which is your cardiovascular. So you've got anything that is going to be high intense for a long period of time, which are going to basically get you out of breath. So you're actually starting to break down fat cells and slowly start to lose weight.
Yeah. No, you're right. So, when it comes to expending energy, obviously your fat cells pretty much get broken down into fatty acids, and those fatty acids is what the fat cells are, because ultimately your body requires fat to function, especially when it's for your skin, your organs, etc., etc. And it's just knowing or normalizing that your body requires fat to function, and if you're diminishing that fat, especially at an excessive level, then you are merely hindering your physical and your mental health too. So, but when it comes to fat loss, obviously it's establishing what cardiovascular individuals are fond of doing. And the answer is there's no right or wrong. It's ultimately what enables you to make it a habit, especially not a chore. So it's thinking, right, let's say you're at the gym or when you walk into a gym and you might not know what you're doing when it comes to losing fat. And you just want to think of any form of cardio that you want to do to lose fat. And it could be the treadmill, could be elliptical, could be a spin bike, recumbent bike, upright bike, functional training, could be absolutely anything. And merely individuals just have to experiment and see what they're fond of, whether it's low intensity, high intensity, it doesn't matter. As long as it accomplishes what you want, then it will work. But how we want to view it is that obviously the higher the intensity, the more calories that you will burn. However, on the flip side is, are you as consistent as you should be? And is it realistic and is it sustainable? And if not, why isn't it the case? So it's like for me personally, I only do 20 minutes of incline walking 5 times a week plus additional daily steps. And that's it. I've gone on many cuts or calorie deficits and I have managed to lose 9 kilograms of body fat, obviously prior to my holiday when I went last month as well. So for me, because my availability schedule, me doing just incline walking amongst additional daily steps has therefore resulted me in burning fat and losing fat. It's just knowing that I know what I'm fond of cardiovascular wise, because as a lot of people know, I weightlift a lot. And if I ever was on even though people have seen me on the treadmill, but people are like, Caine's on a treadmill? In genuine disbelief. But yeah, and that's it. So for me, there's no point me doing all this, whether it's high rocks, functional training, hit training, because I just see that as a more like it shifts away from the goal. So like if my training was devoted to that, then I'm merely going to be focusing on my cardiovascular system and endurance. However, me also doing my incline walking, not only is it a viable tool that assists me in expending energy, however, a simultaneous benefit of it is that it actually allows me to be healthier. So in the sense of, enhancing my cardiovascular system, it could be my breathing, could be my heart rate, could be my beats per minute or my pulse. It could be obviously blood flow, heart regulation. It could be my metabolic rate, could be hormone regulation. There's a lot of factors to consider. So, like, even incline walking or just walking in general has a number of benefits, which I would insist on individuals doing. It's like, and the point being is, cardio is merely a tool that assists you in losing fat. It is not a necessity. What dictates the process of fat loss is your calorie consumption. If you are in a calorie deficit, or in other words, if you are consuming under your maintenance calories, you will inevitably lose fat. And that can be done solely through your nutrition. However, as stated previously, your cardiovascular is a tool to assist you in that process to ensure, obviously, your hunger might not be as suppressed. You might be, you know, you might not be craving as much. You might not be converting your good habits to bad habits, etc., etc. So to integrate that balance between it just makes sense, not only from a health standpoint, however, also from a fat loss perspective. And it's like that now. It's like, right, it's like, what is my perception of cardiovascular? And that's it. And what I deem of it, in the process of losing fat.
So are you saying basically how many calories that you put into your body? Say, for example, you've worked out your calorie maintenance when it comes to your diet, and you're on a deficit, and you want to be able to then also maintain cardio, but also feel okay after because you've got enough fuel in your body to do that cardio.
Yeah.
So I've got a question. So say for somebody who can only get in the gym, say 2 to 3 times a week because they've just got busy life with jobs, kids, whatever, what would you say would be the minimum amount of days that you should go to the gym to lose fat?
Again, it's controversial, however, also subjective, as we need to take into consideration of that individual's lifestyle. I wouldn't say necessarily there is a fixed amount of days I would suggest actually going to the gym, but I think it just boils down to whatever they do, is it realistic and is it sustainable? Is it something that that individual can be consistent with over the period of a week? And in general, the way that I would establish that is if you evaluate what your typical week looks like, you want to attempt to find a gap in your time management. And if there is a gap in your time management that you can seize, then that is an opportunity that I would therefore recommend you take, whether it's 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, etc., etc. If you have time, free time, and you could be watching Netflix, you could just be procrastinating in bed, you could be laid on the sofa, vibing to music, whatever. What you can do is you can therefore commence to configure your routine and create brand new habits by integrating something that's going to be beneficial to that goal, such as walking, I would say would be the bare minimum and sufficient enough for losing fat. So, like, as I've stated previously, someone like myself, years ago, during lockdown, I always used to go to people's park with my dad as a means of cutting. However, I eventually came to a realization knowing, do I need to do this? And the answer was no. Knowing that I didn't need to do HIIT training to lose fat because I felt the benefits physically. I felt fitter. Obviously, my endurance improved, my speed improved, my agility improved, my power improved. However, reflecting on it, it didn't contribute. So for me to do something as basic as walking, that is just equally as effective as any other form of cardiovascular. However, there are benefits to both and and disadvantages to both because obviously your HIIT training is going to burn more calories, whereas your walking won't. However, it's like, right, your metabolism will play a factor, so you might burn more during physical activity thermogenesis, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and anything like that. And it's just knowing, again, is it realistic and is it sustainable for that individual?
Love that. That's bang on. So when it comes to food and people are reducing different types of food because they think that that's going to stop them from the goal. But what sort of system would you say they should put in place when it comes to food, and what food should they or shouldn't eat when it comes to losing fat?
When it comes to individuals' perceptions on their relationship with nutrition, we need to take into consideration as to why that is the case. Where's the origin of it? And let's take an example. So let's say a large Domino's pizza, for instance. Your typical Domino's pizza, large, is probably going to be about 2,500 calories, excluding obviously any additional crust, toppings, sides, etc., etc. And because it contains an astronomical amount of calories, individuals will hypothesize that if they consume that pizza alone, that they will therefore gain fat. And is that true? And the answer to that is no. And people might be thinking, well, why? Because it's pizza. And the answer to that is to enable any individual to gain fat, they must consume approximately 3,500 calories above their BMR, or their maintenance calories, to gain 1 pound of fat. And when it comes to a pizza, it is dense in calories. Is it unhealthy? Yes. But is it okay to eat it? Yes. And the why is because there's balance. And if you've created positive habits and you're in a routine, then it's merely attempting to normalize that it is okay to have that pizza, but as long as it doesn't compromise your current mindset. And when I mean your mindset, I mean your habits and your routine. If it doesn't compromise that, then that is okay. Like for me, I had a Domino's pizza last Saturday and it's not affected me at all because I know that I'm not going to go into that habit of consuming pizzas on a frequent basis. So I know it's not going to be detrimental to my goal. But breaking it down even more, obviously, social media is going to be an astronomical factor to take into consideration when it comes to how individuals perceive nutrition. Obviously, when they view chocolate, cake, biscuits, pizza, anything like that. But again, what influencers state is technically correct. However, as we said at the start of the podcast, it's the wrong way of saying it because as a result of how it's being stated, it consequently results in their perception of nutrition being hindered. Whereas, like, they might restrict themselves, they might starve themselves, and obviously they might just presume this food to be, you know, evil or just bad in general. Yes, even though it's going to contain, you know, some might contain saturated fats, excess sugar, etc., etc. However, our bodies still require that. However, it's merely attempting to balance it. And the way to go about it to improve your perception of nutrition, I would say, would be to first and foremost neglect what individuals state on social media, especially if there is no credibility to justify their claim. And what I mean by that is if someone says you shouldn't eat pizza, I want you to tell me why. And if you cannot give me a justified justification, then why should I believe you? Where is the foundation of trust? And if they don't delve into, you know, the ingredients that are embedded, the consequences of having it, then toodles. However, when it comes to what to eat, I would say, quite frankly, obviously your fats should be obviously healthy fats, so predominantly products like avocados, peanut butter, etc., etc. You've got your starch carbohydrates, so bread, rice, pasta, potatoes, proteins. Obviously, you've got your whole protein sources, so it could be chicken, could be fish, turkey, beef, steak, etc., etc. Again, but it's just balancing it all because obviously some will differ in fat. So if you take the steak, or the beef, obviously that's going to have some saturated fats embedded with it. If you think chicken, obviously the chicken legs or the chicken thighs are going to have obviously more fat as well. And I think if you can incorporate those food and customize meals that you can enjoy at a consistent rate, subconsciously, you will therefore form a habit and a routine just from that. So if you know that you will not deviate from that, you know eventually that it is ultimately going to be okay to have that pizza because you understand that it's not going to be detrimental to your health because you have a balanced lifestyle when it comes to your nutrition, your physical activity, and especially when it comes to the mindset and attempting to enhance their perception of nutrition. And for us, like rewinding back to fat loss, it's like all of this does contribute towards fat loss because if you cannot create positive habits nor create a routine when it comes to your nutrition, uh, what I mean by that is, if you're unsure of what to consume for your meals, how much to consume, you don't know your macronutrients, you're not staying accountable, then again, as I previously stated at the start of this podcast, these are potential obstacles that you can encounter, which would therefore be detrimental to your goal. So, your mindset is going to be an astronomical factor to take into consideration when it does come to losing fat.
When it comes to somebody calculating their calories and it comes to them wanting to do a deficit, how would you suggest they find their maintenance calories?
Okay, so again, you'll hear me say a lot that it's not only controversial but subjective because every individual's maintenance calories is going to differentiate from a number of factors, genetical factors, metabolic rates, obviously, physical activity levels. However, what I would suggest is there are two methods predominantly that you can utilize to enable you to calculate approximately what your maintenance is. So, first and foremost, obviously, a lot of individuals will use calorie consumption calculators, which you can access via Google, or some individuals will use equations from scientists to approximately calculate their calorie consumption, and all they would require is their height, their body weight, and their age. Or you could just use a website or an app, and that will give you an approximate estimation of said individual's maintenance calories. The second option you can do is you can merely just take a hypothetical guess based on what you're eating. So if you can tally your total calorie consumption for that day, and then it's just knowing, right, do I maintain, do I gain, or do I lose? And obviously, it's going to be one of the three. So you don't have to necessarily calculate it, but some people can take a more spontaneous approach when it comes to it. However, it's just ensuring that you are being accountable for it as well. And that is obviously going to be a consequence. However, when you have a set figure, then you know that is there and about, although hence the term or terms approximate and estimation, obviously it is subject to change because obviously, a piece of technology cannot determine that particular individual's maintenance calories. But I would only take it again hypothetically and work around that number if you decide to calculate it online. However, if you decide to just calculate it based on what you eat, again, it's just merely staying accountable. And obviously, even though I've said that a lot, it's like, what do you mean stay accountable? What does that entail? And what I mean by staying accountable is ensuring that you adhere to your routine and your habits. If you know you're supposed to have X, Y, Z for your meal, you ensure that you consume X, Y, Z for your meal, which tallies to X amount of calories and X grams or percent of your macronutrients. In addition to that, obviously, it's ensuring that you adhere to how many meals you consume a day, also adhering to like your check-ins if applicable. So what I mean is whether you go on the weighing scales, whether you do circumference measurements, whether you get your body fat percentage tested, or before and after photos. So that is what I mean by staying accountable. Because if there is an error in the process, then that's where the accountability occurs because you know what the error is and you also know what you're going to do to rectify the error because whether it's physical, whether it's mental, you're merely breaking it down based on your own initial assessment.
So I've got my maintenance calories. I know what it is. How much percent should I go if I'm on a deficit below to lose weight?
So again, I'll always say this subjective, controversial, but I would suggest that you want to apply minuscule increments to your calorie deficit. So, for instance, let's say your maintenance is approximately 2,500 calories a day. I would suggest incorporating merely a 5% deficit in your calorie consumption to commence with, only because obviously your metabolism has to adapt to the number of calories you will be consuming. And obviously, 5% hypothetically is going to be like,
125.
yeah, yeah, 125. So because obviously you're deducting 125 calories, obviously that is 25 calories off approximately what a Rice Krispie square bar is. So, and again, the reason why is because your metabolism can merely adapt to that metabolic change. But in addition to that, it's realistic for that individual to do while also perceiving that relationship with food, knowing that they can still eat, but they don't have to eat less, as we stated at the start. So like they're not going into a starvation mode. They're not, restricting themselves from consuming any calories as well. So ultimately, it merely just has a healthier lifestyle change by applying smaller increments of, percentages into your calorie deficit.
Thank you, Caine. What drink would you suggest is the best drink to drink when losing fat?
Water.
Exactly.
H2O. Water doesn't have any calories at all. And obviously, if you were to consume liquids such as could be protein shakes, could be, don't know, people have like Red Bulls, Monsters, juice, alcohol, anything like that. But obviously, the consequence of liquid calories is that a lot of individuals would have a tendency of neglecting liquid calories. But bearing in mind, liquid calories can be dense, especially when it comes to alcoholic beverages, especially when it comes to protein shakes with milk. Obviously, if it was with water, different case scenario. And obviously, it's just knowing what is embedded ingredients wise into those liquids. So, for instance, we take, Red Bull or Monsters. Obviously, the vast majority of them, unless they're sugar free, they're therefore going to contain an excessive amount of sugar. So, it's merely attempting to integrate a balance between, again, your nutrition, but in context with your liquids. But I would just suggest just drink plenty of fluid. Obviously, H2O. For me personally, that's all I ever drink, really, just water. I mean, I don't really consume anything else as far as I'm aware. Yeah, it's just water. But I guess it's going to be dependent on the individual's preferences and requirements to ensure it's catered to them. But as long as it adheres to their calorie deficit, then they will still lose fat regardless. But again, it's just ensuring that you are accountable for monitoring your liquidated calories accordingly. As again, to reiterate, a lot of individuals would have a tendency to otherwise neglect them, and it's, well, in a lot of people's eyes, it's easier to track whole foods in comparison to liquids because obviously when it comes to like your macronutrients, your protein is the most satiating macro, or in other words, it's the most filling. So the why I would suggest having food over liquid is because, especially your proteins, it's more satiating, and whole foods will be more full. And because of that, whether it's high in fiber or obviously you're consuming your vegetables, that will therefore suppress your appetite as well, whereas liquids don't exactly accomplish that.
So when it comes to you losing fat, and we talk about macros and the percentage between proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, what would you say should be the percentage level of each one when you're calculating your macros?
If we break this down, so your carbohydrates is what is predominantly your source of fuel. And to energize yourself, obviously, your body therefore requires fuel. And ultimately, carbohydrates accomplish that. When it comes to carbohydrates, obviously, typically the average person should be consuming approximately about 50% on average. But again, it differentiates from individual to individual. When it comes to proteins, on the other hand, obviously with proteins, you don't have to consume near enough as much, just because when it comes to the functionality of protein, obviously it enables a process called protein synthesis, which is a process that entails repairing damaged muscle tissue and to enable the growth of cells, which therefore inevitably results in muscle growth. And when it comes to protein, I would suggest approximately, 30%, only just given what the science suggests, because your body can only ingest and digest so much protein. And if you were consuming an excessive amount of protein, any protein that therefore cannot be digested properly will therefore just convert to fat, and that would be therefore suboptimal. So it's merely attempting to obviously balance your protein intake and not solely attempting to over exceed your protein limits. When it comes to fat, on the other hand, obviously, I would say again would be 20%, as obviously your fat is another source of fuel, but only applies if all of your carbohydrates have been expended through, whether it's, physical activity, your metabolic rate, etc., etc. However, your fat and the functionality of it is that it just ensures that your organs are functioning as intended. So all three macronutrients do play a crucial role when it comes to obviously whether it's losing fat, building muscle, and just functioning in general. But I would say a 50-30-20% split or ratio amongst the three macronutrients. However, they are subject to change. They normally have a spectrum of percentages. So, like for carbohydrates, they might say like 45 to 65%. For proteins, they might say 10% to 30%. Or for fats, it might be like, 23 to 30%, something like that. So it'll be on a bit of a spectrum, just to ensure that whatever the percentage is, that it ultimately adds to 100.
I love that. So out of 100%, you would suggest on an average, carbohydrates being 50%, proteins being 30%, and fats being 20.
Yeah.
Lovely.